The crash had taken everything from me except my life, and some days, I wondered if that was really a mercy. 3 months stranded on Proxima Centauri C, watching my crewmates die one by one from radiation poisoning, equipment failure, and simple despair. The emergency beacon had been broadcasting for weeks with no response. As far as the universe was concerned, Commander Elena Vasquez was already dead. Was checking the water recycler when I first heard the howl. It wasn't like any Earth sound I'd ever heard, deeper, more resonant, with harmonics that seemed to vibrate through my bones. The sound came from beyond the crash site's perimeter, where the twisted metal of our survey ship created a barrier between me and the alien wilderness of this world. My hand instinctively moved to the plasma rifle at my hip. 3 months of isolation had taught me that everything on this planet was either poisonous, predatory, or both. The crystalline trees that dominated the landscape could slice through Kevlar with their razor-sharp leaves. The ground itself pulsed with bioluminescent fungi that released toxic spores when disturbed. Even the air tasted wrong: too much nitrogen, not enough oxygen. A metallic tang that never quite left my mouth. But this howl was different. It carried something I hadn't heard since the crash: loneliness. I activated my helmet's night vision and peered through the gap in the hull that had become my window to the outside world. The alien landscape stretched endlessly in every direction, bathed in the eerie blue-white light of the binary stars overhead. Nothing moved except the gentle swaying of the crystal trees in the thin atmosphere. Then I saw it. The creature crouched perhaps 50 meters away, partially hidden behind a cluster of the translucent tree trunks. Even in the dim light, I could see it was massive, easily the size of a terrestrial wolf, but built differently. Its limbs were longer, more flexible, and its head was too large for its body. Most unnervingly, it had 6 legs arranged in a pattern that suggested it could move in any direction with equal ease. But it was the eyes that stopped my heart. Even at this distance, I could see they reflected the starlight with an intelligence that was unmistakably aware. The creature wasn't just looking at me, it was studying me. The same way I was studying it. We stared at each other for what felt like hours, but was probably only minutes. Then the creature did something that changed everything. It tilted its head to one side, the universal gesture of curiosity, and made a sound that was almost like a whimper. It was asking for help. My training screamed at me to stay inside the relative safety of the crash site. First contact protocols were clear: avoid unnecessary interaction with potentially hostile alien life forms. But my training had also assumed I'd have a functioning ship, a living crew, and a way home. What I had instead was crushing solitude and the growing certainty that I would die alone on this world, forgotten by the universe. So I did something that would have horrified my xenobiology instructors. I opened the emergency airlock. The creature, I had started thinking of it as Scout in my head, didn't approach immediately. For the first week after our initial contact, it simply watched from a distance, following me as I made my daily rounds, checking equipment and gathering supplies. Always just at the edge of vision, always maintaining that 50-meter buffer zone. But it was learning. I noticed it first when I was attempting to repair the long-range transmitter. The work required me to move heavy components, and I was struggling with a particularly stubborn power coupling when I heard the soft padding of feet behind me. I turned to find Scout standing just inside the crash site's perimeter, its 6 legs arranged in a perfect hexagon that distributed its weight evenly across the unstable debris field. The creature's head was tilted in that curious gesture I'd come to recognize, and its eyes, those eyes were fixed on my hands as I worked. It was trying to understand what I was doing. "Hey there," I said softly, my voice hoarse from disuse. "Don't suppose you know anything about quantum field generators?" Scout's response was a series of soft chittering sounds that seemed to come from somewhere deep in its chest. The sounds were rhythmic, almost musical, and I realized with a start that it was trying to communicate. Over the following days, our interactions became more frequent and complex. Scout would approach when I was working, maintaining a respectful distance, but clearly interested in my activities. It seemed particularly fascinated by my tools, watching intently as I used them to manipulate the environment around me. The breakthrough came when I was attempting to move a section of hull plating that was blocking access to the ship's medical bay. The metal was too heavy for me to lift alone, and I was trying to figure out how to rig a leverage system when Scout suddenly moved forward. The creature positioned itself on the opposite side of the plating, and with a strength that belied its lean build, helped me lift it clear. Its 6 legs provided incredible stability, and its movements were perfectly coordinated with mine, as if we'd been working together for years. "Thank you," I whispered, and Scout responded with a soft trill that sounded almost like contentment. From that moment, we became partners. Scout would appear whenever I was working on repairs, somehow always knowing exactly what I needed. Its intelligence was remarkable. It learned to anticipate my needs, to distinguish between different tools, even to understand basic human gestures and commands. But more than that, it understood loneliness during the long nights when the binary stars set and the world became a maze of shadows and alien sounds. Scout would position itself near the crash site's entrance, standing guard. Its presence was a comfort I hadn't realized I desperately needed. For the first time since the crash, I wasn't alone. My companion became more than just a working partner. It became my anchor to sanity in a world that seemed designed to drive humans mad. Scout's alien perspective helped me see solutions to problems I'd been struggling with for months. Its 6-legged stability inspired me to redesign my shelter's foundation. Its acute senses alerted me to dangers I would have missed. Its simple presence reminded me that consciousness and intelligence could take forms I'd never imagined, but it was the communication that truly amazed me. Scout's species had developed a complex language of trills, chirps, and harmonic frequencies that could convey surprisingly sophisticated concepts. Within weeks, we had established a basic pidgin that combined its sonic vocabulary with my gestures and simple words. The creature's name for itself was a sound. I couldn't reproduce a musical phrase that seemed to mean seeker of distant sounds, but it had chosen a name for me as well, a 2-note trill that felt like recognition, like being seen and understood by another mind. Through our growing communication, I learned that Scout was young by its species standards, and that it had been exiled from its pack for reasons it couldn't adequately explain. We were both outcasts, both alone in a universe that seemed indifferent to our struggles. That shared understanding created a bond deeper than mere partnership. We were pack in a way that transcended species boundaries. The first sign of trouble came during what I'd started calling the long night, a period when both stars were below the horizon, and the world was plunged into complete darkness for nearly 16 hours. Scout had been restless all day, pacing around the crash site and making low, anxious sounds I'd never heard before. I was working on the beacon's power supply when Scout suddenly froze, its head turning toward the northern horizon. The creature's entire body went rigid, and it released a sound that made my blood run cold. A deep, resonant warning call that seemed to vibrate through the ground itself. "What is it?" I asked, but Scout was already moving, positioning itself between me and whatever was approaching from the darkness. That's when I heard them. Howls. Not like Scout's calls, but something deeper, more primal. The sounds came from multiple directions, creating an acoustic net that seemed to be closing in around us. Scout's pack had found us. Through our limited shared vocabulary, I pieced together what was happening. Scout's exile hadn't been permanent. It had been a test, a rite of passage that required the young creature to survive alone until it could prove its worth. But my presence had complicated everything. By bonding with me, Scout had violated some fundamental law of its species. The pack was coming to enforce judgment. As the howls grew closer, I could make out individual voices, at least 7 or 8 creatures, all larger and more mature than Scout. Their calls carried undertones of aggression and disapproval that needed no translation. They viewed me as a contamination, a foreign influence that had corrupted one of their own. Scout turned to me, its eyes reflecting the faint starlight, and made a sound I'd never heard before, a complex harmonic that seemed to contain layers of meaning. It was saying goodbye. The creature was preparing to face its pack alone, to protect me from their judgment. In its alien way, Scout was ready to sacrifice itself for the bond we'd formed. But I wasn't about to let that happen. "No," I said firmly, placing my hand on Scout's flank. The creature's skin was warm, and covered in a fine, almost fur-like coating that I'd never noticed before. "We're pack. We face this together." Scout's response was a trill of what sounded like protest, but I was already moving, gathering the equipment I'd need. If this was going to be a confrontation, I wanted to be prepared. The first of the pack emerged from the darkness as I finished checking my rifle's charge. It was massive, easily twice Scout's size, with scars across its flank that spoke of countless battles. Its eyes held an intelligence as sharp as Scout's, but colored with something that made my skin crawl contempt. The pack leader approached slowly, its 6 legs moving in a pattern that spoke of absolute confidence. Behind it, the rest of the pack formed a semicircle, cutting off any escape route. Their eyes reflected the starlight like scattered diamonds, beautiful and utterly alien. The leader stopped just outside the crash site's perimeter and released a sound that was part howl, part challenge. It was calling Scout to account. My companion stepped forward, its own posture shifting into something more formal, more ritual. The two creatures began a complex vocal exchange that I couldn't follow, but the emotional content was clear enough. The leader was angry, disappointed. Scout was trying to explain, to justify its actions, but I could see in the pack leader's eyes that no explanation would be sufficient. In bonding with me, Scout had become something other than what its species expected. It had become contaminated by human concepts of loyalty and friendship that had no place in their social structure. The judgment, when it came, was swift and final. The pack leader's howl carried a tone of absolute rejection, and I felt Scout's entire body shudder as if it had been physically struck. The creature had been cast out completely, stripped of its identity and place in the world. But as the pack began to withdraw, the leader's eyes fixed on me with an intensity that made my heart race. Its message was clear. The human was the source of the contamination, and contamination had to be cleansed. The attack came without warning. The pack leader moved with a speed that my eyes could barely follow, its 6 legs carrying it across the debris field like a living missile. I barely had time to raise my rifle before it was on me, its weight slamming into my chest and driving me backward into the twisted metal of the crash site. Pain exploded through my ribs as I hit the ground, the rifle spinning away into the darkness. The creature's claws encrusted. I hadn't realized it had claws raked across my environmental suit, parting the reinforced fabric like paper. But before the leader could deliver a killing blow, Scout was there. My companion hit the larger creature with a force that sent them both tumbling away from me, a tangle of limbs and fury that moved too fast for me to follow. The sounds they made were nothing like the musical communications I'd grown used to. These were sounds of primal violence, of territory and dominance being contested with tooth and claw. The rest of the pack watched in silence as the two creatures fought, their eyes reflecting the starlight like a jury of alien judges. This was more than just a fight. It was a trial, a final test of Scout's worthiness, and Scout was losing. The pack leader was larger, stronger, and far more experienced in combat. Its claws found their mark again and again, opening wounds across Scout's flank and shoulders. My companion's youth and inexperience were telling. It was fighting with courage, but not skill. I struggled to my feet, my ribs screaming in protest, and searched desperately for my rifle. The weapon had landed somewhere in the debris field, but the darkness made it impossible to locate. All I could do was watch as the creature I'd come to love like family was slowly being torn apart. That's when I understood what Scout had been trying to tell me earlier. The creature wasn't just fighting for its life, it was fighting for the right to choose its own pack, its own family. It was fighting for the radical idea that bonds could form across species lines, that loyalty and love weren't limited by biology. It was fighting for us. The realization hit me like a physical blow. In all my years of xenobiology training, I'd been taught to maintain professional distance, to observe without interfering. But Scout wasn't just a research subject, or even a companion. It was family, and family didn't abandon each other. I found a piece of twisted metal about the size of a baseball bat and hefted it in my hands. The pack leader was positioning itself for a killing blow, its claws raised high above Scout's prone form. The other pack members were still watching, waiting for the inevitable conclusion. They weren't expecting a human to join the fight. I hit the pack leader in the side of the head with everything I had. The impact sent vibrations up through my arms and drove the creature sideways. Away from Scout, it recovered quickly, turning to face me with eyes that burned with alien rage. The message in those eyes was clear. I was prey, not a participant in this ritual combat. The pack leader's species had never encountered something like me, a creature that would willingly enter a fight it couldn't win to protect a bond. Couldn't properly explain, but that was exactly what made me human. The pack leader's attack was swift and brutal, but I was ready for it this time. I rolled aside as its claws swept through the space where my head had been, using the creature's momentum to carry it past me. The improvised weapon in my hands caught it across the hind legs, sending it stumbling. Behind me, I heard Scout struggling to its feet, adding its voice to the fight with a sound that was part battle cry, part song of defiance. My companion was wounded but not defeated, and the pack leader now faced two opponents instead of one. The fight that followed was unlike anything I'd ever experienced. It wasn't just physical combat, it was a clash of philosophies, of different ways of understanding loyalty and connection. The pack leader represented the old ways, the rigid hierarchies and species boundaries that had governed its people for millennia. Scout and I represented something new, something that challenged those fundamental assumptions. We fought as a team, covering each other's weaknesses and amplifying each other's strengths. Scout's speed and agility combined with my tool-using intelligence and stubborn refusal to give up. The pack leader was stronger than either of us individually, but it wasn't prepared for our coordinated assault. The end came suddenly. The pack leader, frustrated by our teamwork, made a mistake. It turned its back on Scout to focus entirely on me. My companion seized the opportunity, leaping onto the larger creature's back and delivering a precise bite to the base of its neck. The pack leader collapsed, not dead but clearly defeated. Scout stepped back, breathing heavily, its wounds weeping, alien blood that gleamed silver in the starlight. For a moment, the world was silent, except for the sound of our breathing. Then, one by one, the other pack members began to approach. Their eyes were no longer filled with contempt. They were curious, almost respectful. The pack leader struggled to its feet, its gaze moving between Scout and me. When it spoke, its voice carried tones I'd never heard before: recognition, perhaps even approval. It was acknowledging something it had never encountered before, a bond that transcended species, a pack that included creatures from different worlds. Scout's response was a complex, harmonic that seemed to contain every emotion I'd ever seen the creature express. It was explaining, not just about me, but about the concept of chosen family, of loyalty that wasn't based on blood or species, but on shared experience and mutual care. The pack leader listened, its head tilted in that universal gesture of curiosity. When Scout finished, the larger creature turned to me and released a sound that was unmistakably a question. It was asking me to explain myself, to justify my place in this alien family structure. I didn't have words in their language for what I wanted to say. Instead, I placed my hand on Scout's flank, feeling the warmth of its skin and the steady rhythm of its breathing. The gesture was simple, but it carried all the meaning I needed to convey. This was my pack. This was my family, and I would fight for it, die for it, the same way Scout had been willing to die for me. The pack leader's eyes met mine, and I saw something shift in their alien depths. It was understanding, recognition of a concept that its species had never encountered, but could now acknowledge as valid. The larger creature approached slowly, its movements careful and deliberate. When it reached me, it performed a gesture I'd never seen before. It lowered its head until its forehead touched my shoulder, the alien equivalent of a nod of respect. The pack had accepted me, not as a contamination or a corruption, but as something new, a member of a family that transcended the boundaries of species and biology. The rescue ship arrived 2 days later, its hull gleaming like a star against the alien sky. I heard the engines first, a familiar human sound that should have filled me with joy, but instead made my heart heavy with impending loss. Scout sensed my distress immediately, moving to my side with the fluid grace that had become so familiar. The creature's presence was a comfort, but it couldn't ease the growing certainty that our time together was ending. The rescue team was professional and efficient. They scanned me for injuries, checked my equipment, and began preparations for immediate departure. To them, I was just another stranded colonist to be extracted and debriefed. They had no understanding of what I was being forced to leave behind. "We need to go, Commander," said Lieutenant Torres, the team leader. "The ship's only cleared for a short stay in this atmosphere." I looked at Scout, who was watching the proceedings with those intelligent eyes that had become so dear to me. The creature understood what was happening. I could see it in the way it held itself. The careful control that suggested it was fighting against some deep emotion. "I need a moment," I said, and Torres nodded, stepping back to give me space. Scout and I moved away from the rescue team to the edge of the crash site where we'd spent so many hours working together. The creature's pack had withdrawn to a respectful distance, but I could feel their eyes on us, watching this final interaction between their newest member and the strange alien who had become its family. "I have to go," I said, though I knew Scout understood before I spoke. The creature's response was a soft trill that contained layers of meaning, sadness, understanding, and something that might have been gratitude. I knelt beside my companion, placing both hands on its warm flank. "You saved me," I whispered, "not just from dying, but from dying alone. You showed me that family isn't about species or biology. It's about choice, about the bonds we make with others who understand us." Scout's reply was a complex harmonic that seemed to contain every conversation we'd ever had, every moment of understanding and connection. It was saying goodbye, but also something more. It was saying that the bond we'd formed would continue. Even across the vast distances of space, the creature reached out with one of its forelegs, touching my face with the same gentle curiosity it had shown during our first meeting. Its claws, which I'd seen used so effectively in combat, were careful and precise, tracing the outline of my features as if trying to memorize them. Then Scout did something that broke my heart and filled it with joy at the same time. It began to sing not the simple trills and chirps of our daily communication, but a complex melody that seemed to contain the entire history of our relationship. It was a song of first contact, of growing trust, of partnership and protection and love. That transcended species boundaries. The rest of the pack joined in, their voices creating harmonies that made the air itself seem to vibrate with emotion. It was a farewell song, but also a celebration, a recognition that something unprecedented had occurred on this distant world. As the song reached its crescendo, I felt tears streaming down my face. I'd come to this world as a scientist, trained to observe and catalog alien life, but I was leaving as something more, as someone who had experienced the profound connection that could exist between different forms of consciousness. "Commander, we really need to go," Torres called, his voice carrying the urgency of someone who understood the dangers of staying too long on an alien world. I stood slowly, my hands still resting on Scout's flank. "I'll remember you," I whispered. "I'll remember all of this." Scout's response was a single clear note that seemed to hang in the air long after the sound faded. It was a promise, a vow that the bond we'd formed would endure regardless of distance or time. I walked back to the rescue ship, forcing myself not to look back. The team was waiting, their faces showing a mixture of relief and confusion. They'd expected to find a traumatized survivor, but instead, they found someone who was clearly reluctant to leave. As the ship lifted off, I pressed my face to the small porthole and watched the crash site grow smaller below us. Scout and its pack were visible until the very last moment, their forms dark against the alien landscape. Even after they disappeared, I could imagine them there, continuing their lives in ways I would never fully understand. The debriefing took weeks. I told them about the crash, about the months of survival, about the alien ecosystem and its dangers, but I found myself unable to adequately describe Scout and what our relationship had meant. The words didn't exist in human language for the type of bond we'd formed. The xenobiology department was interested in my recordings of Scout species, but they approached them with the same clinical detachment I'd once possessed. They saw the creatures as subjects for study, not as individuals capable of complex emotions and relationships. I tried to explain, but how could I convey the depth of connection I'd experienced? How could I make them understand that Scout hadn't been just an alien animal, but a friend a family member, a partner in survival who had chosen to risk everything for our bond. The psychologists were concerned about my obvious attachment to what they termed the subject. They spoke of Stockholm Syndrome, of the human tendency to anthropomorphize alien behavior. They recommended therapy, medication, a gradual readjustment to human society. But they were wrong. What I'd experienced with Scout wasn't a psychological disorder or a survival mechanism. It was the recognition of consciousness and intelligence in a form I'd never imagined possible. It was the discovery that the universe was full of minds capable of connection, understanding, and love. Months later, I was assigned to a new research position studying alien communication patterns. The work was important, but it felt hollow compared to the direct, wordless understanding I'd shared with Scout. I found myself listening to the recordings of alien languages, searching for the musical patterns that might indicate the kind of complex emotional communication I'd experienced. Late at night, when the research station was quiet, I would play the recordings I'd made of Scout songs. The melodies were hauntingly beautiful, but they were also reminders of a connection that could never be replaced. I had become part of something unprecedented across species pack, a family bound not by biology, but by choice and understanding. The reports from Proxima Centauri C continued to arrive, brought by the automated survey drones that monitored a system. Most were routine atmospheric readings, geological surveys, biological catalogs. But sometimes, buried in the data, I would find references to the hexapedal communication species and their complex social structures. The scientists studying the data noted unusual behavioral patterns in the pack I'd encountered. They observed increased territorial range, new vocal patterns, and what appeared to be deliberate interaction with human technology. The wreckage of our ship, which had been left behind as too damaged to salvage. I knew what they were seeing. Scout's pack had been changed by our encounter, just as I had been. They were maintaining some connection to the crash site, perhaps hoping for another contact, another chance to bridge the gap between species. The universe was vast and full of wonders, but it was also full of minds capable of connection and understanding. Scout had taught me that consciousness wasn't limited to human forms, that intelligence could evolve in ways we'd never imagined, and that the bonds between different forms of life could be as strong as any force in the cosmos. I had been part of something unprecedented, a family that transcended species, a pack that included creatures from different worlds. And though we were separated by the vast distances of space, that bond continued to exist, a reminder that the universe was not as empty or as lonely as it sometimes seemed. In the end, Scout had saved me in ways that went far beyond physical survival. It had shown me that the human capacity for connection and loyalty wasn't limited to our own species, that the love and understanding we were capable of could bridge any gap, overcome any difference. The pack bond we'd formed would endure, a testament to the power of consciousness to reach across the void and touch another mind. And somewhere on a distant world, under the light of binary stars, a creature that had chosen to call me family was teaching its pack that the universe was full of possibilities for connection that transcended the boundaries of species and biology. That was the most human thing of all, the ability to love without limits, to form bonds that defied logic and convention, to create family not from blood or species, but from choice and understanding. It was what made us who we were, and what made us capable of finding home anywhere in the universe, where another consciousness was willing to reach back.